It's Nicola here at the Disasters Emergency Committee in the second week of our East Africa Crisis Appeal. And I'm thrilled to announce that we have raised an amazing £35 million so far. This truly is an incredible effort on the behalf of the British people, and we are so very grateful for your generosity. We're a little bit later than normal for our Facebook Live today, and that's because we've been out at the East London Mosque today, seeing how volunteers from Islamic Relief, who are one of the DEC members, have been out raising much needed funds on the streets of London today. So thank you so much to Islamic Relief volunteers for all of your fundraising efforts. Please do keep those donations pouring in. And I'm joined today on the sofa by Tala from Plan International UK. Welcome, Tala.
Thank you very much for having me.
And Tala has just come back from Ethiopia. So in these Facebook Lives, we've been talking a lot about the situation in South Sudan and in Somalia. But our East Africa Crisis Appeal also covers the situation in Ethiopia and Kenya. So we thought it would be interesting to hear from someone who'd been in Ethiopia and find out more about what is happening there. So what did you see when you were in Ethiopia, Tala?
So the situation in Ethiopia is worsening steadily. It's reached quite critical proportions in some areas of the country. It's been several seasons of really failed rains. So now the impacts of the drought are really compounded, and families are really struggling to cope with the impacts of so much drought. So you can see huge parts of the north and the east and southern belt of the country that just have had no rain have been in drought conditions for several years, and there's just very limited opportunities for these families to be able to cope in terms of finding sufficient nutritious food for their families and having different livelihoods opportunities.
And is the drought in Ethiopia, is this unprecedented, one of the worst in recent years? How is it different to what's happened in the past?
So one of the things that we're seeing is that the situation that we are in now is getting quite much worse than the drought in 2011, which I think quite a few people will still remember. The scale of the drought is even more just because it's been several years that it's been in drought conditions. So it's just really compounding the impacts. You see really parched dry lands. There's just no pasture available, and a lot of these families are really reliant on livestock and being able to herd their livestock. So just with the very limited quantities of water and pasture, then families are really having to migrate huge distances in search of new ways to be able to raise their herds. And really the impacts that are being felt now is just huge percentages of livestock herds are just dying from the cattle, or so the cattle and different animals are just so undernourished that they're most of them are not really surviving. And I think in some areas it's sort of around 50 to 60% of herds are dying, which means that at this scale it's just going to take years for families to be able to recover, because they don't just provide the most important sources of nutrition for families, but it's their livelihood. So with such loss, it's going to be years before they're able to recover.
Yeah, that's I mean, that statistic that you gave is something that we've heard from somebody that was on the sofa the other day from Somaliland, that 60 odd percent of their livestock and their herds are dying and removing, their source of food, but also their source of income. And it was one of those staggering statistics we saw in Raggy Omar's piece that he did on ITV, that 10 million of the 18 million heads of cattle and goats and sheep in Somaliland had died. So they're quite incredible figures. And I think one of the things I've heard as well is that children saying to their parents that when they've seen the cattle die and the camels and the goats, are the children going to be next? So that leads to my next question, which is what are the other challenges that are being faced by the people of Ethiopia?
So the challenges are huge. I mean, I know that this is widely a food and nutrition crisis, but because of this, the impacts are quite massive. So what's happening is a huge amount of migration, obviously, as families move with their herd in an attempt to find new places. So you have a huge numbers of displaced populations, and you're also having an influx from Somalia into Ethiopia. Obviously, the situation in Somalia is quite bad as well. So there's a lot of people congregating in the few remaining places that still have water and pasture. So it sometimes can lead to conflicts, obviously, because it's quite difficult situations. You have just a great concentration, and that sometimes leads to very drastic effects, sort of like increases in violence against women and girls. With the increased levels of movement, and with women and girls having to walk very long distances for water, the potential for gender-based violence or just other kinds of attacks.
So lots of knock-on effects. So what is Plan International doing to help in the situation there?
So our response is primarily focusing on the really life-saving aid being given to families, primarily on nutrition and also on water and sanitation. So we're supporting the Ethiopian government and different organizations such as the World Food Programme to deliver supplementary feeding to children, especially children under 5 and pregnant and lactating women. Okay. There's just huge amounts of malnourished individuals, so support for that one, and then also provision of water purification tablets and just water canisters for families to be able to store and have access to safe drinking water and water for cooking. And also, as I mentioned, the importance of livestock means that if you treat malnutrition, it's not enough. You also need to be able to safeguard their sources of food. So we're also doing support to livestock in terms of provision of veterinary support and also feed for the livestock.
Our donors, our very generous donors, will be interested to hear that, because one of the two of the amounts of money that we've asked donors to give, one is £100. Will help provide supplies to a health clinic to support a malnourished child for a month. So that's the therapeutic feeding you were talking about. And £60 will help 2 families for a month with clean and safe drinking water. Again, what you've just spoken about with the water and sanitation efforts of Plan International. Now, I wanted to talk in particular about the dangers faced by children in the situation that you describe, and girls in particular. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so I mean, as I mentioned, with some of the situation on the migration and also the difficult access to different food, what we're seeing across large parts of Ethiopia is really a huge rise in absenteeism from school and just downright dropouts of children, of both boys and girls. But sometimes it's even more difficult for girls to have access to opportunities, because also what we're seeing is a rise in early and child marriage. So because it's getting so difficult for families to cope with the impacts of the drought, they're resorting to really negative coping strategies, such as sending adolescent girls or young girls off to be married to different places. There's also increased exposure to child labor, as families really need the support of children to be able to find different income or livelihood opportunities. And also with the high levels of migration, we're getting high numbers of child-headed households who then also have to care for younger siblings. So obviously this really impacts the longer term opportunities for these children, who will not be able to receive a proper education, or also be exposed to a huge number of dangers like abuse or neglect, which impacts both their health physically and psychologically, to then be able to develop into successful adulthood.
That's a lot of knock-on effects from the drought, really spreading far and wide. So how is Plan International helping address the needs of children in particular, as we've spoken about?
So in all of our programming, we really try to highlight the difficulties that children are facing. So in addition to having specific programming that targets children, so for example, we're supporting the establishment of temporary learning spaces, so that children, even if they're displaced, they're able to access some level of education, and also supporting the establishment of child-friendly spaces, so that their children are in safe environments and are able to have places for recreation and really engaging with others and being protected from different abuses. But then also in all of our programming, we do a lot of messaging on the dangers that children face, and especially trying to get the message out across about girls. So for example, in our nutrition programming, we train staff to be able to, first of all, treat children in ways that they're going to feel safe and comfortable, but also talk to parents about the importance of education, especially education for girls, the dangers of child marriage and the huge complications that can imply for young girls. And so messaging about equal access to nutrition, because sometimes families are really struggling to feed all of their children. They might prioritize nutrition for some members of the family. So about equal access to boys and girls to make sure that all grow up healthy.
That's great. Well, it's been fascinating hearing what Plan International is doing in Ethiopia. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you very much for the invite.
So very interesting to hear about what's happening in Ethiopia. And as I said before, this crisis spreads across parts of Kenya as well, and South Sudan and Somalia. So a crisis on a large scale. Your donations have been incredibly generous, but much more still needs to be done. So please don't delay, donate.